For this briefing. We have a couple of important topics to cover today. First, we'd like to give an update on the IATA Travel Pass initiative. There have been some exciting things happening on that over the past few weeks, so we'll take this opportunity to bring you up to speed as to where we are with that. Then our Chief Economist, Pearce, has done some analysis on what's happening with industry cash burn. So we'll present that, followed by a few short remarks from our Director General and CEO, Alexandre Juniac, and then, as usual, we'll throw it open for questions and answers via the chat function. Without any further delay, I'd like to turn it over to Alan, who is heading the ITP project, to take us through what the latest developments are. Over to you, Alan.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hayden. I'm in charge of the IATA Travel Pass application and project. Okay, just as a brief overview of exactly what the IATA Travel Pass is. Effectively, it's a mobile application which the passengers can download, and it'll enable them to prove that they've been vaccinated or received their test results and share that with airlines so that they can be processed automatically using self-service check-in. So if we go through the 4 different things it can do, the first thing is that the passenger downloads the mobile application to their phone, and ultimately in the future, they will use this via the airline's own apps. The second thing it does, it enables passengers to interact with the laboratories where they get tested or vaccinated. And there's two different areas they do this. The first thing is they prove their identity to the laboratories, and then the second thing is the laboratories send them their test results in a way which are what we call verifiable credentials. That really means that the airlines and governments can be 100% sure that these test results are accurate and haven't been tampered with. So at that point, the passenger has 2 different things on their phone. They've got their digital identity and they've got their test results. The next thing they do is they submit those into the thematic rules database, which is a service run by IATA, where we have all of the immigration regulations in the world. We process that and then we say, for this destination, the passenger's test or vaccination is sufficient. At that point, the passenger can then choose to share this with the airline or governments and avail of self-service check-in. So during the last call, we focused in on the creation of the digital identity or a digital version of the passenger's passport on their phone. We're now going to look at some of the other elements on the solution. We prepared a short video for you where we're going to explain exactly how this works. So there are 2 different applications we're talking about here today, or 2 different solutions. The first one is the solution which is used by the laboratories to interact with the passenger. And the second half of the video, we'll look at it from the passenger's perspective on their mobile phone as to what exactly they receive from the laboratory and how they can prove that they're okay for travel. So if I'm just going to share the video with you now. So the laboratories can do 2 things for passengers. The first thing is they can register a new customer, and then once the customer is registered and they've had their test done and the results are available, they can then send the test results to the passenger's phone. So in order to do that, they register a customer. What they do is it generates a QR code which they then present to the passenger. The passenger then takes a picture of that QR code, and that establishes a connection between the passenger's phone and the laboratory system. At that point, the passenger is asked, would you like to share your identity with the laboratory to prove you are who you say you are? So if the passenger clicks on yes, then this screen pops up on the lab agent's laptop or system. They can then look and say, yes, this is definitely, in this case, Louise Cole, and they click on continue. So again, it's a very simple process. They generate a QR code and then they click on continue. At that point, they take the sample from the passenger and then they put the passenger's sample identification into the system. And as soon as it's ready, they click on save or submit. And it's stored in the lab app system. So at that point, the laboratory's they've identified the passenger, they've taken the sample, and then 2 hours later or 3 hours later, they can send the results to the passenger. And that's exactly what they do here. So the first thing they do is they enter the sample ID into the system, or a short sample or a summary of it. They select the right one, and then they choose to enter the test result details into the system. Now, in this demo, we're having it that the person is manually entering all the different results, or all the different elements of the result. However, when a laboratory is using this system, all of this will be defaulted, and the only thing the lab agent needs to actually submit and change is the positive or negative result. So as soon as they've done all of this, they click on send, one moment, or issue test results, and they get sent to the passenger. Okay. So if we now look at it from a passenger's perspective, we're now going to switch over and look at it from the travel pass perspective. Sorry, I see that we went to the beginning. Let me just get back to where we were. Okay, so we're back to where we were. So they issue the test results. And now we get to the passenger mobile phone. So the passenger opens up their phone, and at that point, you'll see that there's a yellow box at the top, which says see test results. So as soon as the passenger clicks on that, they get imported into the phone. And at that point, the phone takes all of the results takes the results, combines it with the passenger's identity. It runs it through the thematic rules database, which is this database of immigration regulations. And if the passenger is good to go, they present the passenger with this screen, which is basically their photograph and a green tick together with the flight details and the date of departure. That means the check-in agent just needs to look at the person and say, yes, this is the same person. And based on this itinerary, they're good to go. I don't need to check any more of the details. If they want, the passenger can also show them the exact test result details via this screen. So if a border agent wants to have the exact details of the test result, they can see them as well. And that is basically it. So you can see it's incredibly simple for both the lab agents and the passenger to use the application. If we now look at the timelines, so we launched the first version of the Travel Pass regulations module back in December, and we've been piloting that with Singapore Airlines. In terms of what you've seen here today in the lab application and the passenger application, that's something we're progressing with the full pilot with Singapore Airlines in March, from the beginning of March. And then we will be piloting with a number of other different airlines from mid-March, and then going the whole way through to April. In terms of the entire solution, we will be launching it on plan at the end of March. And then we will have a second release of it in April, which will include all of the different features. And then finally, once there's a little bit more clarity on how governments are going to issue vaccines and proof of vaccination, we will then embed that functionality into the application at that time. Okay, if we now look at so far, we are working with 20 different airlines to trial the solution, with about another 20 who've requested trials. So we're up at the 40 to 50 mark in terms of airlines who want to trial this. In the last 2 weeks, we've announced pilots with Copa Airlines, Air New Zealand, and Rwanda Air. And today are currently discussions with many other airlines as well. What is very important is we've just announced today that we're going to be working with Malaysian Airlines, who will be one of the first airlines who will actually integrate this functionality directly into their own application. And this is very important because when the way we see this work in the future is not that there will be a separate IATA app which passengers will download, but more we want to move towards a situation where airlines embed this in their own application. As I always say to everybody, I fly most weeks on KLM. I do everything on the KLM app. I buy my tickets, I check in, I select my seats, and so I want to do all of this functionality directly on the KLM app, not go to some other application. If we look at vaccinations, As we know, governments have been introducing quarantine. However, vaccine and testing is the way in which we're going to exit from the requirements for people to quarantine. And the IATA Travel Pass will really enable passengers to do that. If we look in terms of vaccinations going forward, there's a couple of things which we really need to do if we're going to make this work. And the first thing is we need a global standard developed for digital vaccination credentials. In other words, a smart vaccination card as proof that vaccinations need to be accelerated. If you look at what's happening today, many airports are really operating at capacity at the moment, even though they're only carrying maybe 10% of the normal volume of passengers. And that's simply because the amount of time it currently takes to check all the bits of paper which a passenger needs to have, it takes so much time that we won't be able to expand we won't be able to reopen in a sustainable way if we maintain the current system of checking bits of paper. And that's why it's really absolutely critical that we start issuing digital vaccine credentials. So the second point of that is we need governments to issue the vaccine credentials, and the second thing is we need governments to issue them as digital credentials, so we can actually import them into the IATA Travel Pass and the various other applications out there. So that's really going to be key in order to open up travel again. And then finally, we need border agencies to be able to we need border agencies to accept passengers having test results on their mobile phone. So nearly all authorities in the world do accept such results on mobile phones, but there's some countries which are still insisting that passengers have bits of paper. So what we would be asking those countries is, please allow passengers to be able to prove that they've been tested and vaccinated via their mobile phone. Okay, are there any questions at this time?
Okay, thanks very much, Alan. We'll do questions after we're finished. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brian Pearce, our Chief Economist. Brian, I know you've got some interesting research and analysis to share with us. So Brian, over to you.
Tony, thank you very much, and good day to everybody. As you saw from that fleeting title slide, essentially we are concerned now that it's going to take much longer for the industry to stop burning through cash, which obviously raises questions about survivability and obviously the need either for more rapid opening of borders that hopefully the travel pass will facilitate, or the need for more cash from airlines. And one of our causes for concern is you can see here in this slide that bookings have deteriorated. We always had a very low level of activity on international markets. But recall, we had seen quite a recovery in some domestic markets. China and Russia had, during the summer months, had fully recovered. You can see that domestic bookings have now started to deteriorate. And these are bookings for future travel. This means the first half of this year is looking quite a bit weaker than we were expecting when we issued our forecasts in December. And it looks certainly today as though the Easter travel period is not going to see significant border openings. If we move to the next slide, the most important period will be the northern summer travel period over the July-August period, which is so important for airlines' cash flow. It's really important that we get that season in. And we see people flying again at that point to get a recovery in revenues. This chart here shows the bookings curves for the last 3 years for travel during those summer months in July and August. And the red line shows where we are today, middle of February, end of February. We're sort of 78% lower than we were on the pre-crisis year of 2019. I think this is a concern, and obviously bookings are low at the moment because there's still a great deal of uncertainty about whether governments will relax travel restrictions. Now, what I would say is that, we're 20 weeks ahead of that travel period. Typically we would only get 7% of bookings for travel in that period completed by now. So we are very early in the booking stage. And one of the things that we have seen in the last 12 months is that passengers have been booking their travel very much closer to the travel date because of the uncertainty about government policy. So this is not definitive, but it is a cause for concern. And if we look at the next slide, I think one of the drivers of this short-term and the problems that we see for the first half of the year is that the control of the coronavirus has been actually even more difficult than we expected in December. You see that spike across the world in coronavirus cases in January as the new variants of the virus led to much wider transmissibility than had previously been thought, and led obviously to widespread lockdowns of economies in many parts of the world. They've come down, which is very positive, and they've also come down, of course, partly because of the vaccination that is starting to roll out in the advanced economies at least. But they're still very high, and the consequence of that, if we move to the next slide, is that governments have been even more restrictive on their travel across borders. And you can see from what's happened in January that governments across the world have tightened travel restrictions for international air travel. We had seen some slow easing of travel restrictions in the second half of last year, and that has gone into reverse. And we've seen governments being even more restrictive given the circumstances than we had before, which has created a new uncertainty about how governments will react once the vulnerable parts of their population are vaccinated, and whether or not they will start to lower travel restrictions once that vaccination has taken place. We're seeing a much more cautious approach from governments. And so we've been looking at, as you recall from earlier this month, we've been looking at a number of scenarios. If we move to the next slide, for the passenger profile. And I guess the first point to make is that we know that the first half of this year is going to be weaker than we had expected in December. So the red line shows our December profile, our forecast for global passenger kilometres flown as it moves through 2021. And on average, we were expecting RPKs to be, in 2021, 51% of their level pre-crisis in 2019. Now, as I say, because of that bookings data, because of the variants and the tightening of travel restrictions, we know that actually the first two quarters of this year will be weaker than we had been expecting in December. So that's caused the curves to shift down. The dark blue curve shows one scenario that we are currently exploring. And it makes fairly similar assumptions to those that we were anticipating in December in respect to travel relaxation. So we would expect a steep recovery of air travel in the second half of the year as governments, having vaccinated the vulnerable and the healthcare part of their populations, and in many advanced economies, developed economies, got a little further than that, that would allow them to lower travel restrictions between the developed economies. We were always expecting a multi-speed approach to travel restriction barrier lowering, We were always expecting to see a delay before markets with emerging countries to be delayed into 2022 or later. But as you can see, we're expecting a steep recovery in the second half of the year. But because of the weaker start, that pulls the whole recovery down. And so on average, we'd reckon RPKs would be about 38%. And there's an additional risk today with respect to the way in which governments may or may not lower restrictions on international travel. As I say, our expectation and the science is that governments will start lowering those barriers once the vulnerable part of the population are vaccinated. But we've seen a much more cautious approach. And so the dotted line there is a scenario that we're exploring, which takes a much more cautious approach. The consequence of all that is that the recovery in passenger revenues is likely to be, could well be slower than we were expecting in December. And if we move to the next and final slide, this shows the profile for cash burn. Recall that back in the second and third quarter of last year, which were really sort of the worst points of the crisis, airlines were burning through cash at a rate of between $40 and $50 billion a quarter. Now, one encouraging feature has been that airlines, through cutting costs and some domestic travel recovery, have been reducing the rate of cash burn, reducing the rate at which they've been burning through their cash balances through to the fourth quarter of last year. The red bars show our December forecast, when, if you recall, we were anticipating that the industry could start to break even and perhaps even generate cash at a cash on a cash measure by the fourth quarter of this year. Now, if these more cautious traffic projections are right, and I stress that, at the moment we're exploring the scenarios because it's really not clear on how governments will react. We think they should be lowering travel restrictions once a significant proportion of the population is vaccinated. It does mean that we think the industry will still be burning through cash in the fourth quarter of this year. So in total, we would expect cash burn, instead of being 48 billion this year, could be between 75 and 95 billion. And, we wouldn't see the industry returning to generate cash and generate profits until 2022. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Brian. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our Director General, Alexandre, to give just a few comments before we open it up for questions. And I see there are some questions in the queue already, so keep them coming, and we'll get to them very shortly. Alexandre, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon from Geneva. I will keep my remarks very short so we can get your questions. The cliche is that it is always darker before dawn. That seems fitting for today's messages. Brian has described the darkness. Airline financial prospects are worsening as governments tighten travel restrictions. Burning a further $75 billion to $95 billion this year is not something that the industry will be able to withstand without additional relief from government. And the expectation that the industry will not turn cash positive until 2022 is yet another reminder of the severity of the crisis. The dawn is being heralded by good news on vaccine distribution and growing testing capacity. The recovery will likely be led by the developed economies. Whether that is an early reopening or a late one, the work ahead of us is the same. We need to plan for the recovery. We will need a way to digitally manage health credentials. and we need secure global standards to record test results and vaccinations. On planning, the UK has set a good example by laying out their restart plan. After nearly a year of crisis, it will take time for airlines to restart, and we can do that most efficiently with an understanding of how governments see the road ahead. Other governments should take a good look at what the UK has done. With respect to health credentials, these past weeks have seen more airlines sign up to trial the IATA travel pass that will help us be ready for the restart. Manual processes will not be able to cope with the volume of travelers when the recovery begins, but we cannot just have any digital solution. The system must be secure, work with existing systems, align with global standards, and respect data privacy. These fundamentals are at the core of IATA Travel Pass. It is setting a very high bar for managing health credentials, protecting against fraud, and enabling a convenient travel process. While there is choice in the market for solutions, there should be no compromise on the fundamentals, or we risk failing systems, disappointing government and travelers, and delayed restarts. Lastly, we need global standards to record vaccinations and test results. Speed is critical. Fraudulent COVID-19 test results are already proving to be an issue. And as vaccine programs ramp up, governments are using paper processes and deferring digital standards to record who has been vaccinated. These are not the conditions needed to support a successful restart at scale when governments open borders. The WHO, ICAO, and OECD are working on standards, but each day without them means a challenge gets bigger. This challenge includes finding a way to record those who have been vaccinated before the standards are set. The bottom line is we need planning and cooperation between industry and government, supported by global standards. The COVID-19 crisis has caused so much hardship. When governments are able to reopen their borders, we must be ready. That means having the processes, tools, and standards to support a quick ramping up of activity. We look forward to your question. Thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Alexandre. We've got lots of questions in the queue, so we'll try and get to them as quickly as we can. There are a number of questions around the travel pass, so the first ones will be for you, Alan. Starting with some questions on the labs. So how many labs are registered in the system? Does the customer get to choose which lab they go to? How does this work in countries outside of, say, the developed nations at the current point in time? Anything you can tell us in terms of how you're working on the labs, Alan?
Okay. Yeah, there's a number of different ways we're working on bringing on different labs. The first thing is that we are engaging with a number of the large groups such as Fullerton, sorry, I'm having a bit of a brain, Eurofin, CityDoc, Collinson, etc. So we're working with a number of those different organizations, and what they do is they consolidate all the different laboratories in different countries, and then they bring them together as a group. So we're working with some of those large networks, which will bring on a couple of thousand different laboratories then situated all around the world. And the second thing is that in every case where we've been working with airlines, and again, we're working with about 25 different airlines at the moment, and they also have their preferred laboratories. So we also engage all of those laboratories. What's really important to remember is that it's not always a case that every laboratory or a test center will issue test results for travel. So in many cases, it's run by the government, and they issue test results for public health purposes. But in nearly all countries in the world, you have commercial laboratories, and they issue them for travel purposes. And those are the ones who typically tend to be in these networks. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thanks, Alan. We have another couple of questions around government participation. So where airlines have signed up, does that indicate that their governments have signed up also to accept and utilize Travel Pass?
Okay, this is a very, very good question. In essence, governments do not need to come on board in order for the Travel Pass to work. So at the moment, for not even before COVID came around, just purely on things like proving your identity with your passport, governments mandate that airlines need to check that passengers have the right travel documents. And that's exactly what the IATA Travel Pass does. It enables airlines to make sure that the passenger is properly documented for their destination. So we don't have to have governments come on board because how we do it is the airline's business. That being said, we do need a couple of things from governments. Number one, we need them to be able to accept passengers' test results on their mobile phone. And the second thing is we need governments to issue vaccination or proof of vaccination as a verifiable credential. In the long term, it would be great if we could establish a relationship where the passengers could share this data directly with the governments, and then the governments provide the and then the governments provide the airlines with an okay to travel, so they can board the passenger. But again, just to reiterate, the governments don't have to be on board for this. It would be better if they were, but in essence, this is a relationship between the passenger and the airline.
Okay, thanks, Alan. And then one last question in this area, and that's about trial partners. I know we can't talk about partners who we haven't announced yet, but there are a couple of questions around whether those trial partners that we have announced are using the full app, or is that parts of the app with different partners? Are they globally dispersed? For example, do we have partners in North America? Partners in North America. And then lastly, I think actually that covers pretty much the type of questions we're getting on this. So over to you on those two issues, Alan.
Okay. With Singapore Airlines, we did a very limited pilot, which was all around the immigration regulations and the thematic database. So that's something which has been going on in December, January, and February. Then in March, we go live with them with the full pilot with all of the functionality I showed you earlier on today, or earlier on in the call. So we do from now on, any of the pilots and any of the trials will include all of the functionality. So that's in terms of the scope. The second question in terms of global, the global reach of the different pilots, we are doing them in all 5 regions of the world, all the main regions of the world. We have a number of pilots in Central and South America. We've quite a number in Europe. Middle East, as you can imagine, it's being such an important part of the world in aviation. There's a lot going on there. We have them in Africa, and then we have them in Asia as well. The only place we don't currently have, but I think we will do very soon, is in North America.
Great, thanks, Alan. We have another question. I think this goes to Alexandre. In your remarks, Alexandre, you mentioned the problem of how we deal with passengers or potential passengers who are being vaccinated today in the absence of standards. Do you want to maybe talk us through what we're doing in order to try or how those standards might be developed for recording vaccinations?
We have to work with the labs and mainly with the labs to see how we will recollect the data. We need to include the population that has already been or that will have been vaccinated when the app will be ready and in place. So we are working on that to see how we will gather this information.
Okay, thank you, Alexandre. We'll move on to maybe a few questions on the numbers that Brian was talking about. You've indicated a worsening of the 2021 forecast, 2021 operating conditions, I should say. How does that impact the forecast for when we would have a full recovery to 2019?
I don't think it does, actually. I think Alexandre said, it's often darkest just before the dawn. I think the ingredients for a recovery of 2019 levels by 2023, 2024, thereabouts, are still there. And that is, effective vaccines. And, if you look at what is happening with the economic forecasts at the moment, outside of the air transport sector, they're being revised up at the moment, largely on the basis that many consumers have actually got very large savings, which they will spend and they intend to spend. So I think what we're seeing is a much more difficult environment this year for airlines because of travel restrictions, because of government-imposed travel restrictions, obviously related to the variants of the virus, but not because of a lack of willingness to travel. There is, we've seen countless times when travel restrictions have been lowered, a lot of pent-up demand. So we are still, if we're expecting a weaker environment than expected this year, we think that will be offset by a stronger recovery to get us back to 2019 levels in 2 to 3 years' time.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Another question for you. With the cash burn projections that you noted today, how does that impact the industry's debt burden? And how long do you think it would take for that debt burden to be worked off?
Yeah, that's a really good question because cash is essential today, and the industry is going to need more cash as we go through this year to survive. But as we get to that restart and passengers come back, airlines are going to be burdened with a lot of debt. And of course, getting more cash this year, a lot of that will probably come in the form of more debt. So the industry will be going into a period at the end of this year and into 2022 with really too much debt. It's going to need to deleverage to be, it's not a healthy level of debt at all. Some airlines might not be able to survive under those conditions, but the others will need to use the cash flow that they're generating to deleverage, to pay down that debt, which is going to mean there's not going to be a lot of free cash flow available for investing in fleet or investing in the product. It's going to be quite a challenging environment because of that debt.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Maybe a question to Alexandre. We have a question saying IATA is introducing this travel pass, but countries like China, for example, have their own systems for managing health credentials. How do you see these disparate systems merging together, and what is the mechanism in doing that, and what is the role of, say, ICAO or IATA in achieving that?
First of all, we are working with our Chinese members to see if they are interested by IATA Travel Pass. Apparently they are. There is another system. As you know, what we are trying to do is to have something which is interoperable. So we will see if our system is completely interoperable with the existing system in China. If our members have the possibility to choose between the two, we will of course encourage them to be on IATA Travel Pass. We cannot, of course, force anybody to adopt it, but we are pretty optimistic that they will or they can. Regarding ICAO, it's a different point. We are working with ICAO in the CART 3 working group to issue recommendation on standards for this type of application, standards that could be applicable everywhere, and with which, our app, the IATA Travel Pass, will of course comply. So that's where we are, how we are working.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexandre. Alan, this question is for you. We have a couple of people asking about the principles on which the Common Pass or the IATA Travel Pass has been developed, including data privacy and data security. So can you talk us through just what type of system we're using, how we're ensuring that data remains private, and also that the system remains secure?
Okay. The IATA Travel Pass is based on what's called a decentralized identity management. And what that means is that everything happens on the passenger's phone. So when they create their digital version of their passport, it happens on their phone. They receive the test results on their phone. The check for the immigration regulations happens on their phone. And the only time they share data is when they're prompted to. But it's up to them whether they share the data with the airline. And if they do share the data with the airline, it goes directly from the passenger's phone to the airline. And this is really, really, really critical, because what it means is that there's no central database being held by IATA of passenger data. We facilitate everything, but it doesn't go through our systems. And this is the best in class way of dealing with passengers' data. The second point we should make is that airlines are already mandated to collect this data already. So all we are doing here is facilitating it and making it happen in an easier way so the passengers can do all of this before they even leave for the airport. So they can get cleared and pre-checked. So that's what we're doing here. We're not actually introducing any new data flows. All it is doing is making everything much more efficient using the decentralized identity principles.
Okay, thanks, Alan. We have a question about an initiative called the Good Health Pass Collaborative. And Alan, I think you're familiar with that. The question is IATA participating in that? And is that an effective way of trying to have high standards for these types of travel passes?
Yeah, the Good Health Pass, it's a very interesting initiative. I will be completely open that IATA is 100% focused on delivering the IATA Travel Pass with its members, with its members, in order to facilitate the opening up of travel again. So far, we've declined to get involved with, because there's many such initiatives going around, and in the most part, we've declined to engage with them, or to get heavily engaged with them at the moment, simply because our focus is just purely on getting airlines flying again. And that being said, we are very much involved with the WHO, and we're sitting on some of the committees in terms of defining some of the standards which the Director General has mentioned. But again, our focus right now is just getting airlines flying again.
Okay, thanks very much, Alan. Maybe the next question is for you, Alexandre. So in your remarks, you mentioned that with the rate of cash burn over the course of this year, there will probably be a necessity for governments to help the industry out with some relief measures. And the question is, how broadly do you see that relief? Is it just for the airlines, or do you see, and are you concerned about the entire sector, for example, airport services, which the questioner specifically asks about? How do you see? Go ahead.
Right. In the area of responsibility of IATA, we are talking and we are asking for help, focus on the airline. But we are totally conscious that the rest of the value chain and our traditional partners, they also desperately need support. So meaning, NSP, airports, OEMs, aircraft manufacturers. So our request is extended to other parts of the industry, even if we are, by definition, focusing on airlines. But we are totally conscious of the need for financial support by other partners in the industry.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexandre. Brian, we have a question about cash burn in 2020. Do we have a final tally as to how much the industry burned through last year?
Not yet. As I say, we know it was 50 billion and close to 40 billion in the second and third quarter. We don't have final figures yet for the fourth quarter, but I mean it was it was in the region of 150 billion dollars plus. I think the encouraging point was that it was diminishing. Airlines were actually taking action and downsizing their operations, getting efficiencies, reducing that rate of cash burn. It's just, we've still got some period to go through a very difficult 6 months at least before we get revenues back.
Okay, thank you, Brian. We also have a question on cash burn and what that will mean for the amount of relief that would be necessary for the industry. So, Alexandre, perhaps that's one for you. How much, if you're asking governments for relief or to be prepared for relief, how much do you think they need to have ready for the industry?
We have always said that that for the next 6 months until the first half of 2021, we would need for airlines only something around $70 to $80 billion for pieces, and that will help us to bridge the gap until the beginning of the recovery that we hope will happen in the second half of 2021. So the order of magnitude is in the range that Brian gave previously, so between $75 to $95 billion of support, avoiding the more we can using massively debt instruments because the industry is too heavily indebted already.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexandre. We have another question, actually a couple questions for Alan. First one is, does the IATA Travel Pass work for both PCR and antigen testing? And secondly, once the passenger sees their test results, do they have to do something else in order to get those to the government or the airline or the authority concerned?
Okay, the first thing is, do we cater for PCR and antigen? Yes, we do. In total, there's 20 different test types out there, and we cater for all of those 20 different test types. One of the bits of work we're going to be doing with government is trying to reduce that to a more manageable level, and because many of these test types typically tend to be the same. So we'll be working on governments to try and come up with a standard naming convention so we can get it down to a manageable level, but we cater for all of them at the moment. What was the second question again? Sorry.
Hang on. Let me just see. Second question was, what happens once you receive the test result? How do you get that to the authorities? Do you have to press something else, or is it showing your phone to somebody, or is it a NFC type of function?
Okay. There's two different ways. Okay. When you receive your test results on your phone, the check into Automatic to make sure that you're okay for that journey, that happens automatically, and you get what that that screen I showed earlier on with the green tick at the top to say you're okay for this itinerary. So that all happens automatically. At that point, you can choose to share your test results and your identity with the airline, and you can do this in two different ways. The first way is where you show it on the screen, and that's by presenting it to the check-in agent. And the second way, which will come in a little bit down the line when airlines are ready for it, is where you actually can click a button and say, send this data to them electronically. And if you can then send that data to them electronically, the airline can then receive it and say, this passenger is good to go. And at that point, they can then open up self-service check-in again, which means you don't need to go to an agent to have your travel documents checked.
Great, thank you for that. And then one other question, just taking that a bit further, how does Travel Pass leverage on the existing thematic activities that IATA has?
Okay, very good question. Most people don't realize that IATA has actually been collecting and collating the immigration regulations for the last 60 years. IATA, about 10 years ago, we built a system called Automatic Auto Check. And what that is it's a rules database which takes all of the immigration regulations in the world and puts it into a rules database engine. And airlines check-in systems and kiosk check-in and web check-in from nearly all airlines of the world link into that. So when you check in for your flight, your itinerary details and your passport details get sent through to that database. It gets processed and sends back an OK to travel. And last year we catered for about 800 million passengers, international passengers, through that system. So since the end of 2020, since COVID came a year ago, we've actually been including all of the COVID regulations into that database. So we're now in a position where we have all of the COVID regulations in addition to the standard passport and visa regulations in that system. And that's an integral part of how the IATA travel pass works. And that's how we can be sure that passengers are correctly documented.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So there are a couple of questions around the proliferation of travel passes and various types of technology to do the same thing. And the question that seems to be emerging is, are we confident that IATA's travel pass will be the solution? Or is it even, I suppose, necessary for the industry to coalesce around one solution? Can we have a proper restart even if we have many different types of travel passes? Maybe Alan, did you want to start with that?
Yeah, it's another very good question. The first thing is that IATA does not want to own this space. The IATA Travel Pass is just one of a number of different solutions out there. We happen to think that the way we've done it has been designed for airlines to meet their needs, and rather than just technology for technology's sake. So we've listened to what airlines want, and we built it all around that. And that's a number of different things. It's the identity element. It's the receiving the test results as a verifiable credential. It's around the thematic rules engine, and it's about passengers being in control of their own data. So those are some of the principles which we think sets our application apart. That being said, there are other applications out there. And what we would say is that we need to have standards where each one of these different applications can interact with airline and government systems. So that's really what we need, is standards for where the different apps integrate with airline systems, as I said. And that's something which is going to be really important. And that means that airlines can choose which of the different vendors they want to work with. So that's something which we're pushing very hard on.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. We're coming close to the top of the hour, so we'll take just a couple more questions. Brian, I know you need to drop off a couple of minutes early. So just to alert you that there have been a couple of questions asking if you would reconsider your retirement and continue to help guide us through this crisis. I suppose it's just an opportunity for you to, well, first of all, hopefully reassure us you're around for a few more months, but anything you'd like to say, Brian?
Well, only there's still a lot to do, and I'm here in place working hard for the next few months, right up until certainly the middle of the year, and even then I'm not intending to completely leave the industry, but there's a lot to be done in the next few months.
Great, thanks very much, Brian. And then I think the last question we'll put to you, Alexandre. Earlier this week and even back into last week, there was a fair amount of discussion as to the role of Travel Pass and the UK and their plans to emerge from or to restart the economy after COVID. Question is, how have those plans gone? And how realistic is it to expect that we will see Travel Pass being used to facilitate UK travel in the near future?
The first part of the question is what?
With the United Kingdom, there have been some speculation that or reports that IATA is in discussion with the UK on using Travel Pass. So the questioner is asking if there's an update on that, and how likely is it do we see Travel Pass being a part of the UK's plans?
No, there is no particular update, and we have been discussing with the Department of Transportation, but that's for the moment. We have to continue the discussions to see how it will be used by the UK government. if and when and how it will be used by the UK government, and of course by our UK members about the other UK airlines. No particular update on that point.
Okay, excellent. I think that covers most of the questions for this week. So